Hi, this is Jack from Maths Forge, and in today's lesson we're going to be doing trigonometry to find sides. So before we start learning about the functions in trigonometry, we need to be aware of the sides of a right angle triangle. So here we have a right angle triangle and an angle theta over here, and the three sides are known as the following. The side directly opposite the angle that you are dealing with in the question is the opposite side. So this side can actually change from question to question. If theta was actually this top angle here, then the bottom side would be the opposite. But in this case, because theta is at the bottom right hand corner here, then the opposite side to it is funnily enough known as the opposite side. The longest side of the right angle triangle, the hypotenuse, is always facing the right angle, and this will never change. The adjacent side is the third side. So once you've determined your opposite side and your hypotenuse, the remaining side is the adjacent side. Commit this to memory because you're going to need it for every single question in trigonometry. So now let's look at the functions in trigonometry. We have our first function, sine. And sine works on an angle and it produces the following: the opposite side over the hypotenuse side. And I'm just abbreviating the opposite and the hypotenuse side to save us time writing. The next trigonometric function is cos or cosine, and this also works on an angle to produce the following: the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And the third trigonometric function is tan or tangent, and this works on an angle to produce the following: the opposite over the adjacent. Now, a very nice way to remember all three trigonometric functions is using this acronym: SOH CAH TOA. SOH CAH TOA. So sine of an angle is equal to the opposite divided by the hypotenuse, cos of an angle is equal to the adjacent divided by the hypotenuse, and tan of an angle is equal to the opposite divided by the adjacent. So I know this seems like a lot to take in, but actually applying this is very straightforward. So let's actually use all of this information to solve this question here. Here we're being asked to find the side x to one decimal place. You first begin by writing out SOH CAH TOA. You then begin by labeling the sides of your right angle triangle. So the side that is opposite the angle that we're dealing with, in this case this 58.1, so this side here, is known as the opposite side, so I'm just going to call it op. The side opposite the right angle, this side here, the longest side of the right angle triangle, is known as the hypotenuse. So I'm not even going to label it because they haven't given us any value for it and we're not looking for it. And the third and final side is known as the adjacent. So I'm just going to call it A, D, and J. Now we have to determine which trigonometric function we're going to use. Well, we have the opposite, O, and the adjacent, A. Out of the three trigonometric functions, which one has O and A? In this case, it's tan, so it's TOA. So we're going to go ahead and use tan to solve this trigonometric problem. We're going to have tan on the angle that we're dealing with, which is 58.1, is equal to the opposite side, so O is first, so the opposite side first, and in this case the opposite side is x, which is what we're looking for, over the adjacent side, so A is second, and then that's what goes in the denominator. And in this case, the adjacent is 28. Now all we have to do to solve this problem is to rearrange for x. So x is currently being divided by 28, so to isolate the x, to get it on its own, we're going to multiply both sides of this equation by 28. This now leaves us with 28 times tan of 58.1, and this is equal to x. Now, we need our calculator for the next part, and we need to input this into our calculator. But before you do that, make sure your calculator is in degrees. And you'll know if it's in degrees if there is a small D icon, the letter D, on the calculator screen. If there is an R or a G, you have to go to the menu settings and change it to degrees. Once you've confirmed your calculator is in degrees, you can go ahead and put this value into your calculator and we should get the following: 45.0 to one decimal place, and this is equal to x. And since we're looking for a side, we're going to give this side here centimeters. And if we check our answer, there it is. Now let's do a 2-star example. We first begin by writing SOH CAH and TOA. Our next step is to label the right angle triangle. So the side opposite the angle that we're dealing with, this 46.4, which is this side here, is known as the opposite side. I'm not even going to label it because we're not being asked to find it and they haven't given us any value for it. It's an empty side, so I'm not going to label it. The next side we're going to look at is the hypotenuse. So it's the side opposite the right angle, and it's the longest side of the right angle triangle. In this case, it's x. So I'm going to label this with HYP for hypotenuse. And the third remaining side is known as the adjacent, which is 40 centimeters. I'm going to label it as ADJ. Now let's see what we're dealing with. We have the adjacent and the hypotenuse, so A and H. Which trigonometric function has A and H? In this case, it's going to be CAH, so cos. And this is what we're going to use to solve the problem. So we're going to have cos of the angle that we're dealing with, and in this case it's 46.4, which is equal to the adjacent side, 40, over the hypotenuse side, which is x in this case. Remember, the first letter in your trigonometric function A is the one that goes in the numerator, and the second letter H is the one that goes in your denominator. So now to rearrange for x, it's going to take 3 steps. The first step we have to do is we have to stop x from becoming a denominator. And how we're going to do this is as follows. We are going to multiply by x. And the reason we're going to multiply by x to both sides of this equation is because we have 40 divided by x on the right-hand side. If we multiply by x, a divided by x and a multiply by x will cancel out, leaving us with x on the left-hand side multiplied by cos of 46.4, which is equal to 40. So it cancels out on the right-hand side, but it appears as a numerator on the left-hand side. And now to isolate this x and to get it on its own, there's currently a times cos 46.4 being attached to it. So we're going to detach this cos 46.4 by dividing it. So we're going to divide by cos of 46.4. And we're going to do this to both sides. This now leaves us with an x on the left-hand side, and the cos 46.4 with a multiplication cancels out with division. And on the right-hand side, we end up with 40 over, and I'm going to write the division as a fraction, cos of 46.4. And now inputting this right-hand side into our calculator, we get the following. X is equal to 58.0 to the nearest decimal place. And since x is a side and the other side is in centimeters, then our units for this question will be in centimeters. And if we check our answer, there it is. Now let's do a 3-star example. We're going to first begin by writing SOH, CAH, and TOA. And then our next step is going to be to label the right angle triangle. So the side that's opposite to the angle that we're dealing with, opposite to this 32.3, which is this side here, is going to be known as the opposite side. But since we're not looking for it because there's no x here and they haven't actually given us any number for it, we're just going to ignore it. So the next side we're going to be focused on is the hypotenuse. So the side opposite the right angle triangle, which is 240 centimeters, is the hypotenuse. I'm just going to call it h. And the remaining side, x, has to be the adjacent. So I'm just going to call it a. So we have a and h. Which trigonometric function has a and h? In this case, it's going to be CAH. So we're going to be using cos to solve this problem. So cos of 32.3, the angle, is equal to the adjacent over the hypotenuse. And in this case, the adjacent is x, and the hypotenuse is 240. So now to find x, this just becomes a matter of rearranging for x. It's currently being divided by 240, so we're going to multiply both sides by 240. This is going to give us 240 times cos of 32.3 on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, it's going to leave us with x. Inputting this into our calculator, we get the following: 202.9 to the nearest decimal place, and this is equal to x. And since we're looking for a side and we're dealing with centimeters, then we'll put the units here as well. And if we check our answer, there it is. And that's it for the lesson on trigonometry and finding sides.